Right here where this post cemetery was, I believe used to be a redoubt in 1760. And then I'm gonna walk towards now the baseball fields to show you more or less where I believe the French positioned themselves in 1756. So I'm not gonna get too close to the baseball fields, but the fields are right over here. Right here. Here's the main baseball field, and then the two softball fields over there that way. Now down here, we keep going. The fort is over here to my right, and while I think it was cut out a little bit when the baseball fields were built, you can see that it's kind of on a plateau, and it has sort of a good vantage point towards the fort. Now it's possible, however, that this rise here in front of me was there in 1756, and that the French army established themselves maybe a little bit more closer to the fort than I originally had thought, or kind of mapped out. Now my math is not the greatest, and I realized that I didn't really verify my source, so it's very possible that the distance from the fort is greater, or even possibly shorter than I had originally thought. But roughly I would say about here, maybe even up on this rise here going that way, is where the French would have established themselves in 1756 to attack the fort. I don't know how much the topography has changed. That said, I do know that there is on the map a rise right before the fort, and that is where the French established themselves. And looking at this topography and topographical maps, yeah, that's basically what it looks like today. There's the fort, which is on a rise, and then there's a little valley in front of the fort, and then the baseball field and softball fields are on more of a slope or on a higher plateau than the valley. So topographically speaking, yes, this position does make sense for the French army besieging the fort. Now admittedly, they're not going to be able to hit the stone walls, if there were stone walls in the original fort, but if the ramparts were about as high as they are now, then it's very likely and very possible that they would have been able to hit those ramparts. In the end, it didn't really matter because the British force was already outnumbered and outgunned, so the British were most likely just gonna surrender anyway, regardless of wherever the French established themselves. But, you know, topographically it makes sense for the French to be somewhere around this area because it's on a plateau, then there's a valley, and then you have the fort. And in siege warfare, you're not necessarily trying to destroy the fort. You want to keep those fortifications, so you're going to siege it. And the best way to do that is to surround it, which the French did. There was a marsh over on the other side of the fort that I forgot to point out. And then you have the lake on this side, and then the French extended from the parking lot here all the way down, past through the fields, and then to that building, essentially cutting the British off from any supplies that they could have gotten from the interior and making it difficult for them to get any supplies from the lake. So topographically, historically, it makes sense for the French to be roughly in this area here, even though my map may have the British or may have the French army either a little too close or a little too far away from the fort. This would be a good position for an attacking army. This is the post cemetery that was established in the 19th century, I believe, after the War of 1812. Now, like I said, at St. Paul's Cemetery, there's supposedly a cross that General Montcalm established when he won, or when he captured Fort Ontario. Now, as I mentioned also before, I have been here several times, and even now, standing here, I do not see a cross, nor have I ever seen a cross that is not a grave marker. Alright, so my assumption is that the cross General Montcalm built for his victory at Fort Ontario, which was then later deconstructed by the British and then relocated, is, or was at one point, maybe is gone now, but is somewhere over by St. Paul's Cemetery. Because again, the couple sources that I looked at said he built the cross for his victory before his army embarked to go back to Canada. If he built it when he was embarking his ships to go back to Canada, then it's likely, or it's more likely, that the cross would be at St. Paul's Cemetery than here, because just a few feet away from St. Paul's Cemetery is where the French actually disembarked or landed on August 10th and then had to re-embark on August, I believe it was the 15th, to go back to Canada. So because of that, it's more likely that St. Paul's Cemetery is where the cross Montcalm established is, or was relocated to. But again, I mean, I drove around there, and I've been here several times. I have not seen a cross that is not a gravestone. So either the cross is non-existent, or was destroyed at some point, or just is somewhere that I'm not looking. I have yet to find this cross. So I will look a little bit more into it. If you all want to, that's good with me. I'd appreciate that. But again, I have found very little evidence, more or less little primary evidence, to suggest that there was a cross established by General Montcalm in 1756 that was relocated by the British or the Americans in, I believe, the 19th century. Not entirely sure.